Wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deepest seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll say memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Okay, hi everybody, welcome to our first of a series of 5 or 6 sessions focusing on paper 3 as we head towards the final exams on Friday the 7th of June. I know some people are international students, they've maybe just got multiple choice paper left, but for most of us it's the synoptic economics element that is in view now as we head towards Friday the 7th. We're going to have some specialist sessions on AQA technique and EdXL technique next week. This week, we're going to do 4 topics that haven't yet really appeared in any substantive way on papers 1 and 2, which we think are likely, sort of not hot topics, but likely exam focus, particularly because they invite a synoptic aspect, micro and macro. So welcome if you're watching us live, as hundreds of people are. Just press subscribe so that you can contribute to our amazing chat window. We have one of the most supportive, intelligent and curious groups on the interweb. We'll get going in a second or two. If you're watching on replay, just pause that button anytime you like to take a screenshot or take some notes. So we're going to look at poverty and inequality because it has both micro and macro aspects today. So let's crack on. We have about half an hour, bit of background to start with. I was just, as you do over half term, reading the World Bank Inequality Report. It's just come out. I'm sure many of you have spent the morning doing that as well. World economy, total income, 122 trillion, okay? The global adult population of 5.1 billion. So in theory, if there was an equal distribution across all adults in the world, making an adjustment of PPP, everybody would have $23,000. But of course, we know that's not the case. The people in the poorest half of the world's population have just 8% of global income. Can you draw a Lorenz curve to show that? Just under $4,000 per capita PPP. The richest 10% have half, 52% of global income, $122,000 PPP. So we know we live in a world of inequality. As I said to you before, if you talk about inequality in the essays, you are in a good place. It's too important to ignore. So let's crack on. First of all, now you may not have covered this, but some people have, so I thought I'd just chuck it in as a bit of extension. Have a go at this one. What's the difference between pre-distribution and redistribution in terms of income and wealth? Have a go. This is quite important. I'll explain it, obviously, and give some examples. Louis saying, hasn't touched economics since paper 2. Louis, good. That's good thinking. It's great to have a break. And the purpose of these sessions is just to get our feet moving, give ourselves a really good shot for paper 3. Paper 3 determines your grade, everybody. It really does. So what do we think? Pre-distribution? You may have come across redistribution. And Ella, I think, has a terrific answer. Noah, likewise. Yep. Jim in the production room is working hard to get these comments on in the gap there. Well done. But a hat tip to our production team. Fantastic. Yeah, there's Ella's answer. Pre-distribution before taxes and welfare. Redistribution aims to get a more equitable distribution. Very hard to beat that answer. And these, if you haven't covered this before, these could be little phrases to use. Because if you're going to tackle, as Gemma's excellent answer shows there, if you're going to tackle a question on policy, there is a degree of policy intervention when it comes to pre-distribution, but most interventions are designed to achieve a final, if you like, an ex post outcome to change the final distribution of income or wealth. So Ria's answer, welcome to Ria. Pre-distribution occurs before income tax deductions, perhaps affected by discrimination, indeed often multiple examples of discrimination. Redistribution is ways such as progressive taxation to redistribute from rich to poor to a degree. Absolutely right. So some great answers coming through. Keep an eye on the chat window. So pre-distribution, factors that affect the original distribution of income and wealth before taxes and welfare. We'll give you some data on a second. So Luke's saying, what's an example? Well, there are deep inequalities in wages across different occupations, Luke, and that would be a factor causing pre-distribution. The deep inequalities in wealth, inherited wealth, for example, and many factors, of course, pre-distribution. Your lifetime earning is often determined at birth. Where you live, which country you live in. Do you have parents who are both in work? Do you have access to childcare, for example? That's pre-distribution. Redistribution, as you've been saying, it's reallocating income after it's been generated by the market. So here we go. Great chat, by the way, as John is pointing out. Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, if you're a labour market aficionado, these were the lowest paid jobs in 2023, actually. Chart should be for 2023. These are median full-time weekly earnings of the lowest paid jobs in the UK. Retail cashiers, checkout operators had the lowest pay, under £400 a week for a full-time job. Coffee shop workers, $416. So those are typical, and that's not a surprise. Including fitness and wellbeing instructors, often quite well low paid. Whereas the highest paid jobs in the UK, there we go, 2023, I think this is, I might have put the wrong figures in, but 2020, nothing's really changed. CEOs, the median pay of CEOs was £1,600 a week. Obviously, that's the median. We know the mean will be way higher than that. But places like head teachers, financial managers, aircraft pilots, and air traffic controllers. So those are the highest paid jobs. A really great application coming in from Will Smart Molinero. 62% of those in poverty have at least one family member in work. Will is pointing out superbly that there is a lot of working poverty, which we will talk about. And the Snap Bandit, again, who is one of our great international contributors, talking there, pre-distribution also has clear and obvious positive impacts on the overall economic potential, particularly in terms of human capital. We'll come back to that. The Snap Bandit supplies our policies, education, health and transport. Yeah, Gem, stock options, wealth would be part of pre-distribution. Oftentimes you inherit wealth and that perpetuates inequality. Okay, so let's move on. Let's crack on. Some great contributions in the chat. Our focus here is synoptic thinking. Now, if you're an EdXL student, you'll know this for sure. You often have to give a micro and a macro perspective. So we're going to practice that today. Can you please give me 2 micro policies that might be used to achieve a more equitable income distribution? Let's have a go. Yeah, NXL, you will get a question. The 25 marker will be micro and macro. It will be in the question. So we're going to practice that today. Yep. Illy there, a minimum wage, maximum wage. And that could apply to one industry. But if it applies to the whole economy, it becomes at the intersection of micro and macro. A ban on bankers' bonuses, Stefan, would be a micro policy because it relates to one industry or one occupation. Alfie talks about price cap on utilities. That could have an indirect effect on income distribution. EE goes for something that really does have an effect in terms of cash transfers, subsidising childcare. That would be a micro policy. What we find actually with EdXL students preparing for this paper, the key to paper 3, don't forget, virtually the whole of paper 3 is not synoptic. You get a micro question, you get a macro question. It's the 2 25 markers that are synoptic, essentially. And we'll talk about that in our session next Tuesday, on next Wednesday on EdXL. So what we're going to practice today is just being clear on what is micro, what is macro. If you get a good feel for that, you'll be in great shape. Claire talks about limiting the power of monopsony employers of labour. Claire, as soon as you say that, my heart skips a beat because I can think of a monopsony diagram that go with that excellent point. Here are my 2 answers coming in for you. Yep, I've gone for subsidies to support the childcare industry, per capita funding for the very young. By the way, I did a jigsaw puzzle the other week and it said on the box from 1 to 4 years. And I was really pleased because I managed to do it in less than 20 minutes. So things like subsidies for childcare, designed to increase affordability, increasing female labour market participation. If you can have 2 adults in work, obviously nobody aged 18 in work because you'll all be doing national service, but if you can have 2 adults in work, the chances of lifting yourself out of poverty go up. And I've gone for minimum wage for low wage jobs, maybe even union reforms, protecting union recognition. Big debates at the moment about unionisation in places like Amazon. Evaluation points, by the way, the childcare sector, there is tax-free childcare in this country. You get a tax relief on childcare, but the number of childcare providers is going down, not up. Many of them simply can't make any money. The minimum wage can help reduce working poverty, but many households in poverty have no one in paid work. So you have to tackle it in another way. Right, let's think synoptically. Next question. Can you give me 2 macro policies to achieve a more equitable distribution? Have a go. Howie talks about 0-hour contracts. Yeah, I think that again, that's at the intersection of micro and macro, Howie. They would reward both. 0-hour contracts tend to be quite industry specific, if that makes sense. So I think it probably would be more micro than macro. What we're practicing here, everybody, especially those of you joining us on replay, we're just practicing micro, macro. Can you make that clear distinction between the 2? Noah is a big fan of supply side policies, such as investment in education. You might have to be a little bit more specific there, Noah, to get the extra credit. Jack goes for progressive taxes, higher welfare benefits. It's not easy, of course, in 60 seconds to be detailed on this. Great answers coming through in chat, as always. Muzza, education and training, such as increased degree apprenticeships. I like that. JP Morgan, record number of apprenticeships this year. Yeah, it's the JP Morgan campus. Deloitte now have a campus. Madeline talks about supply side policies, investment in healthcare. Yes, I think that's a really important point, actually, Madeline. And I think I'll come back to that one in a second. That's a really long-term policy. Some great answers coming through. Most of you think about tax and spend. Let's look at my answers here on the screen for you. So I've gone for shifting towards a more progressive income tax system. We have one already. So you probably just have to be a little bit more detailed, perhaps increasing the tax-free allowance, maybe having a lower starting percentage, instead of 20%, maybe 10%, perhaps increasing the top marginal rate of tax from 45 to 50% or higher. Of course, it's 47% in Scotland. Then evaluation, what are the consequences for work incentives, possible brain drains. And I've gone for government spending. That's a macro policy. Targeted spending, healthcare, early years education, Gordon Brown's Sure Start programme, social housing, public works, etc., infrastructure. But of course, the evaluation is that is part of the levelling up agenda, but it takes many years to have a significant impact. That said, under fiscal austerity from 2012 onwards, which, as you know, if you know which university I went to, I'm a Keynesian, I was opposed to fiscal austerity. The abandonment of Sure Start in 2012, 2015, we're now starting to see the effects. We're now getting the research showing the impact on GCSE outcomes, for example, in certain areas. Great stuff. Let's crack on. So we're doing really well here. Let's look at working poverty in the UK. The figures are shown on the chart. Just under 12 million people are in relative poverty before housing costs, but 14.5 million people, over 1/5, after housing costs. So clearly the cost of housing, including renting, is a major factor in causing relative poverty. That's people below 60% of median income. Bit of background. Let's look at the question for you. Can you give me 2 micro effects of an increase in the minimum wage? Have a go. Now, minimum wage hasn't figured too highly so far in any meaningful way, I don't think, on the various exam papers. Correct me if I'm wrong. So could they give you a synoptic question on the economic effects of a higher minimum wage? Now, the key here is to think micro first. So think about the impact on the individuals or businesses or industries. Thank you to Bethany for her answer. Yeah, this is really important. Think about the impact on individuals and businesses and industries to get the high marks or micro analysis. Can you give me some examples of industries affected or occupations affected? Stefan has a really lengthy answer there. Jess comes in with wage cost increase, supermarket profits fall. Great answer, Jess. I mean, terrific answer. Can you improve that by giving me an example of the kind of businesses that would be most affected by an increase in minimum wage? See, for EdXL in particular, we are looking for you to make the micro point, which Jess does beautifully there. Can you then apply that point with a bit of such as seasoning? Some great answers coming through. What have we got here? Stefan, the increase in capital labour substitution in some industries. Stefan, such as an increase in the quantity employed and wage paid in a monopoly market, such as a reduction in profitability as AC and MC goes up, such as. We're looking for our Queen Bee, efficiency wage theory. Workers may be incentivized to be more productive. Businesses affected, such as restaurants, may see a fall in marginal average costs. That may well do. It's hard to measure productivity in many sectors, of course. Let's have a look at my answers here. So I've gone for, at the individual level, people and families may have more real disposable income. That then allows them to increase their loan spending, perhaps build up savings, make them less exposed to high interest rate credit, such as payday loans. So I've gone for the impact on the individual families. But of course, much depends there on the employment effect of a minimum wage. And that depends on the elasticity of demand for labour. And then I've gone for businesses, and many of you did, an increase in variable costs in labour-intensive industries offering relatively low pay, such as retail, tourism, hospitality, healthcare, social care, security. In then a micro paper, don't forget paper 3. You've done it in paper 1, you've done it in paper 2. Use the such as application. It gets you the application marks. Of course, the evaluation then depends on whether businesses can pass on those higher costs, either through higher prices or absorb them through increased productivity. Jess says small firms will be most affected as wage costs may be a large proportion of variable costs. Absolutely right. The Federation of Small Businesses has said that the minimum wage increase of the last year is becoming tough, really becoming tough. Howie comes in with an interesting point. If we put Howie's point on the screen, could you argue that many firms paying living wages like Tesco, many firms pay living wages like Tesco, so those earning minimum wage are often earning a second household income? Yes, that is true. Minimum wage is probably not the best way to reduce relative poverty. There are lots of middle-class families with 2 or 3 people working, and they get a boost to their incomes as well. And I would argue that the best way to reduce poverty is to have a universal basic income. But I still support the minimum wage in principle. I just think we're getting close to that kind of, not tipping point, but close to a point where businesses really are struggling, given all the other costs going up to, and Dia talks about unintended consequences there, which is a good point. Okay, let's move on. Contrast, I just want to give you some different contexts here. Can you give me 2 macro effects, please, of an increase in minimum wage? So micro focuses on individuals and focuses on businesses. Over to you, this one. Can you give me a macro effect? In the exam, you just have to think about 1 or maybe link cleverly 2 macro points together, and you'll be fine. And Daniel does that really well on the screen now. Bringing in AD, potentially a multiplier effect. Daniel's ready for paper 3, no question. Kirsty comes in with a different point, actually, about real wage unemployment, increasing welfare payments, worsening the government budget deficit. So that's a perfectly valid chain of reasoning there from Kirsty. Well done on that one. I think with this one, you choose your macro point, don't you? You don't have time to write lots of points. You build 1 macro argument. Lots of answers coming through. Some people talking about competitiveness going down. So Florin talks about decreased international competitiveness due to high unit labour costs. Could worsen the current account. It's probably true. I'm not so sure that many industries in the UK that are paying minimum wage are exporters. But certainly in the service sector, that could have an impact on tourism, for example. The relative cost of hotels and restaurants and things go up, and that might have an expenditure switching effect. There's some great points coming in. Wow. I've gone for AD. Yeah, so I think high minimum wages in theory increase directly the earnings of low-income workers, who typically, as some people said, have a high propensity to consume. If you want the evidence, by the way, the minimum wage affects about 1 worker in 12 or 1 worker in 13, just under 3 million people affected by it. And a full-time adult worker will probably see just under £2,000 a year in their pay if they keep their job. However, they'll probably lose quite a bit of that in tax, because of course the government has frozen tax allowances at 12,570. So the minimum wage, the impact of the minimum wage, is being muted by the effects of fiscal drag, if that all makes sense to you. And then I've gone for tax revenues. In theory, minimum wage should boost tax revenues for the government, people earning more and spending more. And you probably have to pay less on means-tested benefits, such as a universal credit. But on the other hand, the government employs millions of people, many of whom are low paid, porters in hospitals and people working in the social care sector. So government spending might go up as well. But some great points coming through, and do take a look at the chat window as people both contribute and respond to those points. Well done on that. Let's crack on. I want to give this a slightly development focus. EdXL fans, I know there's at least 2 in the audience today. There wasn't much development economics on paper 1. Well, you wouldn't expect on paper 2. And there was nothing really on inequality. So how about poverty and inequality in a development context? The World Bank has just published some data saying that by 2022, a decade's worth of progress in cutting extreme poverty had been essentially reversed by the pandemic and other shocks. Global poverty reduction was dealt a severe blow by the pandemic and other shocks in that period, leading to the first increase in global extreme poverty in decades. So in that context, let's have a look at my question. Can you give me 2 micro effects of an increase in extreme poverty in a country? Have a go. Kate, does this apply to OCR? Yeah, I think this content is certainly OCR helpful. What we're trying to do here in this session, Kate and others, is just focus on the difference between micro and macro, and therefore we are thinking synoptically to a given context. The switch lens comes in with a point about demerit goods. I'd love an applied example there, switch, such as. But you're thinking the right lines there. Really focus on the impact on individuals and households and businesses, I guess, as well. Lowest point, I think, has a micro aspect. Grace is slightly more specific there with a de-scaling point. So the impact on labour productivity and the impact on family incomes. Some good points coming through. Let's have a look at my answers. So I've gone for the consequences. Oh, sorry, Grace. Increased consumption of inferior goods such as basic supermarket beans instead of Heinz. Yes. Our focus here, Grace, is probably low-income countries. So whatever the relevant band would be there, you could use. So falling real per capita incomes causes a fall in consumption. Try and link it to development. So I've gone for a fall in consumption on essentials causing a rise in malnutrition, child stunting, and other health outcomes. And obviously families in extreme poverty, millions of them often can't afford the basics, can't afford school fees, school uniforms or other costs. So school enrollment goes down, or that gap between mean and expected years of schooling gets wider, dropout rates increase. And really important, now again, I focus on individuals. People in extreme poverty are often forced into informal or precarious employment. They don't have job security or adequate wages, increase in child labour, and obviously an increase in vulnerability to loan sharks and so on. Charlie says, is government finances micro or macro? Charlie, it is macro. So whenever you're talking about government finances, that's macro. A question coming in from, is it Mika saying, what is child stunting? So Mika, with child stunting is where, and this is all done by the things like UNDP, the height of a child is lower than you would expect for a child of a given age. So you actually measure child height. Hopefully you get accurate measurements of the height of children as they reach 3 and 5 and 7. The great economist Angus Deaton has done some amazing work on the link between malnutrition and development, and it works both ways. Okay, and thanks to Elodie for her answer there. Have a look. Let's move on to the synoptic aspects. So can you give me 2 macro effects of extreme poverty going up in a country? Have a go. Yeah, as David said, it's when children don't grow as expected because they don't have the right or sufficient nutrition. Lil 6 says, what day is Paper 3? It's on Friday, the 7th of June. Don't miss it. Some great answers coming through. When you're thinking synoptically, you're thinking about macro indicators, aggregating. So Florence bringing in accelerator effects and capital flights. A lot of points in that short answer there. Really interesting how you flesh that out as a chain of reasoning. Now Madeline's making an interesting point there about the rise in child labour having an impact on long-term educational outcomes. Many of you are talking about impact on government finances. G9, one of our great contributors, our amazing contributors, talking about consumption of healthcare and education has an impact on long-run supply. Yeah, so lots of points thrown in there. Just with a synoptic paper, I'm not criticising G9's answer there, but avoid a scattergun approach. Pick a point and develop it, would be my good advice for this paper. Pick a micro point, pick a macro point and develop it, and then evaluate. Let's have a look at my 2 answers. I've gone for AD. So extreme poverty limits, obviously, household consumption. It's often, for most countries, consumption is the biggest part of AD. And weak demand limits investment, as businesses may see reduced profitability. So very low incomes, of course, limit the ability for households to save. So some of you may have covered in revision the Howard-Dermar growth model. Countries with a big savings gap might then be unable to invest as much unless they can attract FDI or income from remittances or external debt. And then human capital and LRAS. Yeah, quite a few of you, I really enjoyed reading the live stream. Quite a few of you were saying impact on educational attainment, impact on human capital, poor health outcomes associated with extreme poverty, reduced labour productivity, increased healthcare costs, put government systems under pressure, you can make a strong case for saying in the long run, what really matters is productivity. And what really matters for productivity is human capital. So some really good stuff there. Some great answers coming through. Gemma, it depends which exam board you've got. Gemma asked a question here. For paper 3, can you include micro and macro in all the questions? If you're edXL, no. Some of the questions will be micro, some of them will be macro. The 225 markers will be micro and macro. Whereas AQA, you can bring micro and macro in pretty much across the board, and are expected to do so. Okay, let's crack on. Almost there, everybody. Bit of context, I think, coming up. Oh yeah, can you give me a quick explanation, please, of the Kuznets inequality curve? Have a go. We're going to finish off by thinking about the Kuznets curve and thinking about growth and poverty and inequality. What is the essence, please, of the Kuznets income inequality growth curve? If you've covered it. Alan saying, bro, what is that? Michael will do a special session on AQA next Tuesday, so tune in for that one. We're going to really zoom in on the AQA technique. Here's Noah's answer. Edward comes in, when a trade-off between growth and equality. Equality rises up to a certain point, or inequality rises. Here's Stefan's answer. We'll focus on Stefan. As the country industrialises, its inequality often worsens as the disparity between incomes of those in rural and urban areas gets worse. Yes, and Shani gets in with a point about GNI per capita rises, rising levels of inequality, but after the turning point, inequality falls as progressive tax systems and public sector is developed. Well done, everybody. Let me explain this for you. So the basic idea is that hypothesize, I'll put an extra S in there. As an economy develops and per capita incomes grow, often, not always, but the inequality goes up initially, but then eventually decreases. You kind of get not necessarily a U shape, but an inverted curve when plotted on a graph. Let me just show you that. So here's the Kuznets curve. You can use it also for environmental damage, can't you? Gini coefficient on the y-axis, per capita national income on the x-axis, PPP. So as countries industrialise and urbanise, oftentimes you get a rise in inequality. Not always, by the way, but it can happen. The turning point is reached, and then it may be the case that inequality falls back, particularly as you move towards services and if governments intervene with progressive tax and welfare systems. Okay. By the way, you can just develop this curve. If you move on to the next slide, one development is to think about the impact of things like globalization and AI. A lot of people argue that one of the criticisms of globalization is that it worsens inequality at each level of per capita income. That may not be the case, of course, but that shifting that curve up might suggest that things like AI, the returns to the adoption of new technologies often increase inequality. So you might go from Y2 to Y3, but end up with higher inequality because of external factors, including globalization and new technology. Protectionism, in theory, might shift it down. But of course, you can argue that it doesn't, because protectionism often hits the poorest hardest, particularly if you put tariffs on foodstuffs. John says it reminds me of fiscal drag causing upward shift in the Laffer curve. John, absolutely right. And fiscal drag, I think, came up on the edXL paper this year, didn't it? Actually, the term came up. I'm not going to mention what I thought of the papers 1 and 2 today. I might mention that in our special sessions next week. Let's finish with one more question. And this is really quite challenging, so do have a go. Can you give me 2 reasons why a period of growth might lead to increased inequality? Have a go. So why might fast growth, rapid growth lead to increased inequality? Meek has a nice point about FDI and worker exploitation. That's good. Ali unleashes his Inner Piketty there with a point about wealth. Jen talks about imbalanced growth captured by the top 1%, or the top 10%. Yeah. So Ali talks about the assets of the wealthy rise faster than workers' income. That is a really good point, Ali. A fantastic point. Well done. And Tom Beckley, again, unleashes classic. I thought you might have underlined the word classic there, Tom. Classic Thomas Piketty and the R over G hypothesis. The R is the rate of return on capital. G is the rate of growth. That during a period of rapid growth, oftentimes it's the rise in wealth and profits, which can outpace the growth of GDP or income per capita. Liam, most supernormal profits from firms are given to shareholders or to high income earners in the form of bonuses. Growth is often concentrated in the most productive areas, such as London or the southeast. Southeast. Correct. And in many, many countries, of course, as countries grow, as they urbanise, the gap between urban and rural areas gets wider and deeper. It's not just a UK phenomenon. Interestingly, within London, there's probably more inequality within London than between London and other areas. Some absolutely brilliant answers there. Lara talks about firms may reward their shareholders rather than being dynamically efficient, which would have benefited consumers. Yeah, it's really about the proceeds of growth, who benefits, who gains from growth. Here are my 2 points coming up on the screen for you. So unequal returns to skilled labour. Oftentimes, as countries grow, the returns to skilled workers, software engineers, construction workers, what have you, the wage returns are much higher relative to the wages of people working in farming, tourism, etc. And critically, growth can lead to higher returns on investment in capital. Could be stocks, could be machinery, could be real estate. And people already wealthy benefit disproportionately. Extension Piketty's view about the return on capital R being faster than the rate of growth G. Harry comes in. Can we discuss free ports, Jeff, if growth is localised as well as in London compared to the north? Yeah, free ports, part of the levelling up agenda. Although keep in mind, of course, most free ports are not actually ports. They're nearly always aircraft hangars and disused runways. Last question today. Thank you, by the way, with nearly 400 people watching this live, which is phenomenal. Can you give me 2 reasons why a sustained period of increased living standards might cause a fall in inequality? Talk me about moving down the Kuznets curve. Have a go. Our last question today. Well done, everybody. I hope you found this a useful sort of return to economics as we head. We've got 10 days for the exam, lots of time. And we'll do our best to showcase some new students in this final question. So why might higher living standards actually cause inequality to go down? As they are in countries like China, for example. India, the Gini coefficient is going down, both in rural and urban areas. It's not inevitable that inequality continues to rise. Liam's got some great answers there coming in. And Luke talks about increased living standards, higher government revenue, therefore greater ability to spend on benefits. Here's Max's point, the increase in consumer merit goods, decrease in demerit goods allows MRP to increase. Yeah, it's a nice little labour market point there. I think most of you are getting the idea that it depends on what the government does with their revenues. So Grace talks about, for example, it means government spending can increase, such as on essential public services, reducing levels of absolute poverty. Yeah, social housing, basic healthcare, schooling. I mean, these are the public, the merit goods. There's a public good aspect to them. So the governments have more money to spend on public goods, for example. Some great answers coming through there. Ayushi talks about could lead to the trickle-down effect. As higher income earners spend more in the economy, leading to job creation. Yeah, I think that's probably right. Although I'm not a great fan of trickle-down economics, if the truth be told, but there is clearly an effect. And the Stat Bandit, where would we be this year without an answer coming in from our great supporter and top student in Singapore? A gradual shift from agrarian sustenance, low-paying jobs to manufacturing jobs, which are higher paid and scarce initially. This is increasing income inequality in the short run, but in the long run, indeed, as Paul Collier says, every time a population doubles in size, productivity goes up by about 20%. The way to reduce inequality is twofold. One is, or threefold. One is to urbanize. Two is to have more people in formal waged employment in businesses operating at scale. And thirdly, for the government to run some semblance of a progressive tax and welfare system. That is the way to do it. And Faye says, Snap Bandit is unleashing the inner Lewis model there. Absolutely right. Here we go. Oh, by the way, Harry says, Jeff, I've watched all your live streams. Helped me a lot. Thanks, Harry. Haven't been able to watch any live until now. Well, welcome to Harry. I think our group will give you a very warm welcome. Here are my two answers coming through. Just to finish with, I've gone for the fact that growth in theory enables governments to expand the social safety nets. So providing support to the most vulnerable communities and households. In theory, governments get more tax. Then the question is, what do they spend the money on? But of course, in many countries, there's a lot of corruption, and tax avoidance limits the possible fiscal dividend. And I've gone for as living standards go up, opportunities for upward mobility increase. So in theory, as countries get richer, there's more entrepreneurship, there's more intrapreneurship, more innovation, more dynamic efficiency. Entrepreneurial spirit spreads across the population. Microfinance might be a catalyst for that. But often there are deep, persistent structural barriers to economic and social mobility in every country, including, of course, the UK. Very quick reminder that in the synoptic paper, lots of scope for diagrams. So diagrams include the Lorenz curve to show changing income and wealth inequality, things like minimum wages we talked about today, rent controls, I think Goram talked about childcare subsidies, labour market diagrams. You know, if you get a chance to bring a diagram or two into your analysis, the Kuznets curve we mentioned as well, didn't we? Examiners always credit relevant, developed diagrams. Okay. Well done, everybody. What a great turnout today. We're getting back in flow. We're getting back in motion. Tom's back. Wouldn't be the same without you, Tom. Couldn't watch for the last few weeks because of school. Well, if you want to blame school, Tom, that's up to you. But it's great to have you back live. Have to remember to like the video. You can press dislike as well, by the way, especially if you didn't think it was any use. So we have got, what have we got? We've got 6 live streams left. 3 more topic-based ones, and then we go with we got 6 more left, 4 more topic-based ones, and then 2 specific ones to examples. As we head towards Friday, the 7th of June, these are important times. You've got other exams, obviously, but I think many of you will be quite a way through your exams, and you'll be looking ahead to getting on a flight and having a wonderful summer, or working on a great project, or heading off on a gap year. Who knows? The key thing is to keep going. We often find, by the way, that people's performance in paper 3 dips. It's almost as if they think the job's done, No, paper 3 determines your grade. Okay, so if you can get paper 3 sorted and you get well prepared, just revisit all the stuff from paper 1 and paper 2, no new material, you'll do well in paper 3 and you'll finish on a high. And that's what we want everybody to do in this group. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We're going to look at unemployment tomorrow. Again, another topic that's been tested much this year, micro and macro economics of unemployment. So do join us at 11:30. For now, stay safe, stay positive, stay happy, stay curious, and see you sometime soon.